Oops, my sister-in-law smirked, watching a mountain of salt pour over the beautiful roast I had spent all afternoon preparing. My hand slipped. I guess you'll be the laughingstock of your law firm tonight. Have you ever had a family member who smiled in your face while secretly trying to tear down everything you've worked for? Tell me your story in the comments below, and please subscribe. It took years to understand the deep, hidden pain driving her to break me, but the battle lines were officially drawn on what was supposed to be the most important night of my career. The aroma of rosemary and garlic should have been a comforting embrace, but tonight it felt like a ticking clock. I stood in the center of my immaculate kitchen, wiping down the marble countertops for the 4th time. Tonight was not just another family dinner, it was the most critical evening of my professional life. After 5 grueling years of late nights and missed anniversaries, I was finally up for junior partner at my law firm. The senior partners, Arthur and Evelyn, were coming to my house. They were notorious for judging a lawyer's character by how they managed their personal lives and their homes. My husband, David, walked in, adjusting his tie. He wrapped his arms around my waist, kissing my cheek. "It smells amazing in here, sweetheart. You're going to knock their socks off." I leaned into him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I hope so, David. I've planned every detail down to the minute. The meat is resting, the wine is breathing, and the table is perfectly set." But even as I said it, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The variable I couldn't control wasn't the temperature of the oven or the acidity of the wine. It was David's younger sister, Clara. Clara had invited herself over under the guise of helping out, but I knew better. Ever since David and I got married, Clara had made it her mission to undermine me. Whether it was commenting on my demanding career or my choice of curtains, she thrived on making me feel inadequate. Tonight, of all nights, I needed her to just be a supportive family member. I took a deep breath, smoothing my apron. "What time is Clara getting here?" I asked. Before David could answer, the doorbell chimed. The sharp chime of the doorbell echoed through the hallway, making my heart skip a beat. It was an hour before the partners were scheduled to arrive. Clara was incredibly early. David gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze and went to answer the door. I closed my eyes for a brief second, repeating a silent mantra: "Do not let her get to you. Keep your composure." When I walked into the foyer, Clara was already peeling off her designer coat, handing it to David without looking at him. "Darling brother," she purred, finally turning to me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "And there's the busy lawyer. I'm honestly surprised you know where your own kitchen is." I forced a polite smile, ignoring the immediate sting. "Hello, Clara. Thanks for coming early to help." She carried a plastic bakery bag, swinging it carelessly. "Well, I figured you'd be drowning in stress. I brought a pie for dessert, store-bought of course, since I know you don't have the domestic touch to bake from scratch." She brushed past me, marching straight into my domain. The kitchen felt instantly smaller. She eyed the neatly arranged prep stations, her nose crinkling slightly. Clara had always felt threatened by my ambition. She was a homemaker who prided herself on traditional perfection, and somehow my choice to pursue corporate law felt like a personal insult to her lifestyle. We had never been able to bridge the gap. Every gathering was a subtle chess match of passive-aggressive remarks. "You can set the pie on the counter," I said evenly, returning to my cutting board to chop carrots. "Everything is well under control." Clara smirked, leaning against the island. "We'll see about that." The kitchen air grew thick with a stifling, unspoken tension as Clara hovered over my shoulder. I focused intently on chopping the heirloom carrots, the rhythmic sound of the knife against the wood grounding me. I had planned a menu that was elegant yet comforting: a classic beef roast with a red wine reduction, roasted root vegetables, and a delicate potato gratin. The centerpiece, of course, was the meat. It needed to be flawless. "Is that the roast?" Clara asked, gesturing toward a large pan resting near the stovetop. "It looks a little pedestrian for senior partners, doesn't it?" I didn't break my rhythm. "It's a classic recipe, Clara. Arthur loves traditional comfort food, and Evelyn appreciates simplicity done well. What Clara didn't know, what no one knew, was that the roast she was scrutinizing was entirely fake. Well, not fake meat, but it wasn't the main event. It was a cheaper cut, quickly seasoned and set out as a decoy. Why? Because after 4 years of enduring Clara's accidental spills, her helpful rearranging of my ingredients, and her knack for ruining my hosting efforts, I had learned to anticipate her sabotage. My real masterpiece, a premium, dry-aged prime rib, was safely hidden away in the secondary oven in the pantry, already roasting to a perfect medium rare, glazed and fragrant. "I suppose it'll have to do," Clara sighed dramatically, crossing her arms. "I just hope you haven't bitten off more than you can chew. It would be a shame if your firm thought you couldn't handle a simple dinner party." I wiped my hands on a towel, meeting her gaze steadily. "I can handle a lot more than people give me credit for, Clara." Her eyes narrowed slightly, a dangerous flicker of challenge igniting within them. David popped his head into the kitchen, entirely oblivious to the silent war waging between his wife and his sister. "I'm going to run upstairs and change into my suit," he announced, checking his watch. 30 minutes until 0 hour. You two doing okay in here?" "We're having a wonderful time, David," Clara sang out brightly, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Just having a little girl talk," I nodded, giving him a genuine smile. "Go get ready. We're perfectly fine." As soon as David's footsteps faded up the stairs, Clara's demeanor shifted. The faux cheerfulness vanished, replaced by a calculating coolness. She began to wander around the kitchen island, her manicured fingers trailing over my carefully arranged spice rack. "You know," she began casually, picking up a small crystal salt cellar, "David told me how much this promotion means to you. It would be devastating if something went wrong tonight. If the food was inedible." My pulse quickened, but I kept my back turned, pretending to adjust the heat under a simmering saucepan. I had played out this exact scenario in my mind a dozen times. "Nothing is going to go wrong, Clara. Accidents happen," she replied, her tone alarmingly light. "Sometimes people get distracted. They overseason things, they forget to check their measurements." I watched her reflection in the dark glass of the microwaves. I saw her hand hover over the pan holding the decoy roast. I saw her unscrew the lid of a large salt shaker she had slipped from the cabinet. My breath hitched, but not out of panic. It was out of a profound, heavy sadness. She was really going to do it. She was willing to sabotage her own brother's evening just to see me fail. I turned around just in time to see the white cascade of salt pouring over the resting meat. She didn't even try to hide it. She tipped the shaker with a deliberate, spiteful flick of her wrist, burying the decoy roast under a mountain of sodium. When she realized I was watching, she didn't gasp or apologize. Instead, she slowly set the shaker down and crossed her arms. A triumphant, nasty smirk spread across her face. "Oops," Clara whispered, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "My hand slipped. I guess you'll be the laughingstock of the firm tonight. Such a tragedy for the aspiring junior partner." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to amplify with every second that passed. She waited for my reaction. She waited for the tears, the screaming, the frantic panic of a ruined evening. She wanted me to break. Instead, I felt an eerie sense of calm wash over me. The anxiety that had plagued me all afternoon evaporated, replaced by a cold, resolute clarity. I untied my apron and draped it over a chair. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply smiled. It was a genuine, serene smile that made Clara's smirk falter. I walked slowly past her, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor, and moved toward the closed pantry door. "What are you smiling at?" she demanded, her voice losing a fraction of its confidence. I opened the pantry door, revealing the warm, glowing light of my secondary convection oven. I pulled on the oven mitts and carefully lifted out the heavy roasting pan. That was the decoy roast, I whispered, turning back to face her. In my hands rested the real dinner, perfectly glazed and aromatic. Clara stared at the golden brown crust of the real prime rib, her mouth slightly open. The triumphant gleam in her eyes shattered, replaced by a mixture of shock and sheer embarrassment. The rich aroma of the perfectly seared meat filled the room, overpowering the harsh metallic tang of the mountain of salt she had just wasted. I set the heavy pan down on the center island, right next to her ruined decoy. I didn't want to gloat, but I needed to establish a boundary that she could never cross again. I was fighting for my career, and I refused to be a casualty of her insecurity. "You," she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the roasting pan. "You knew?" "I've known for years, Clara," I said, my voice steady, stripped of any anger. "I know how you operate, and I know how you feel about me." I walked over to the counter where she had left her plastic bakery bag. I picked it up gently by the handles. "But I did tell the partners you were bringing dessert," I whispered, holding her gaze so she could see the absolute resolve in my eyes. Without breaking eye contact, I stepped on the pedal of the garbage can and dropped the bag inside. "And I just threw your store-bought pie in the trash." Her face flushed a deep, angry crimson. "How dare you? David will what?" I interrupted, my tone softening into genuine pity. "Believe that you accidentally dumped half a pound of salt on my roast, but I magically produced another one? You played a childish game, Clara, and you lost. The partners will be here any minute. If you truly care about your brother, you won't ruin this night for him." Before Clara could utter another word of protest, the sharp chime of the doorbell echoed through the house. The sound snapped the tension in the room like a taut wire. Clara blinked rapidly, her chest heaving as she struggled to process her defeat. Upstairs, I heard David's heavy footsteps hurrying down the hallway. "I'll get it," he called out, his voice filled with nervous excitement. I moved with practiced efficiency. I quickly slid the heavily salted decoy roast into a heavy-duty trash bag, tying it tight and tossing it into the bottom of the pantry before pulling the door shut. I grabbed a damp cloth, swiftly wiping away the few stray grains of salt Clara had spilled on the pristine marble counter. "Fix your face," I murmured to her, turning my attention back to the beautiful, glistening prime rib. "And remember, you are the supportive sister tonight." David bounded into the kitchen, looking handsome and polished in his tailored navy suit. "They're here," he whispered, rubbing his hands together. "Are we ready?" He looked from me to Clara, a brief flicker of confusion crossing his face as he noticed his sister's flushed cheeks and unnaturally stiff posture. "Clara, everything okay?" Clara forced a strained, high-pitched laugh that sounded entirely foreign. "Oh, everything is just peachy, Davy. We were just marveling at the roast." I untied my apron, smoothed down the skirt of my dress, and gave my husband a reassuring smile. "We're perfectly ready, sweetheart. Let's go welcome Arthur and Evelyn." As we walked into the foyer together, I felt a surge of professional adrenaline. For the next 3 hours, I wasn't just a targeted sister-in-law. I was a host, a lawyer, and a future partner. The dining room glowed under the warm light of the chandelier, the crystal water glasses catching the reflections of the taper candles I had meticulously arranged. Arthur, a tall, imposing man with silver hair, and Evelyn, sharp-eyed and elegant, sat across from each other. David and I anchored the ends of the table. Clara sat rigidly next to David, her usual conversational dominance completely stifled by her earlier humiliation. "I must say," Arthur began, taking a bite of the prime rib, his eyes widening in genuine surprise, "this is exceptional. The glaze, the perfect medium rare. I haven't had a roast this good since my last trip to Florence." Evelyn nodded in agreement, dabbing her lips delicately with a linen napkin. It truly is wonderful. You must have spent all afternoon in the kitchen. How do you manage it all with the heavy caseload you're carrying? This was the test, the hidden interview disguised as dinner table chatter. I smiled gracefully. It's all about preparation and anticipating challenges, Evelyn.
In the kitchen, just like in the courtroom, if you have a solid foundation and a backup plan for unexpected variables, you can handle any pressure. I briefly locked eyes with Clara across the table. She stared down at her plate, pushing a roasted carrot around with her fork. The color drained from her face at the subtle double meaning of my words.
A brilliant philosophy, Arthur chuckled, raising his wine glass. To preparation, then. David beamed at me from the other end of the table, his pride radiating across the room. He reached over and patted Clara's hand affectionately. My sister here even brought dessert tonight, he added helpfully. She's been so supportive. Clara flinched as if she had been burned. The mention of dessert hung in the air, thick and dangerous. Arthur and Evelyn turned their expectant smiles toward Clara, waiting for her to elaborate. Clara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked completely trapped, terrified of what I might say or do next. I could have destroyed her right then and there. I could have exposed her sabotage, revealed the trashed store-bought pie, and watched her crumble under the severe judgment of my senior partners. A part of me, the part that had endured years of her petty insults and emotional neglect, wanted to see her face the consequences. But then I looked at David. I saw how genuinely happy he was, how much he loved his sister and believed in our family unit. Breaking Clara meant breaking his heart, and I wasn't willing to pay that price for a moment of petty revenge. Actually, I stepped in, my voice smooth and rescuing. Clara and I had a little mishap in the kitchen earlier. The pie she brought unfortunately met with an accident. It was completely my fault. I bumped into the counter and dropped it. Clara's head snapped up, staring at me in utter disbelief. I was giving her an out. I was taking the blame. "Oh, what a shame," Evelyn murmured sympathetically. "It is," I continued seamlessly, standing up to clear the dinner plates. But, relying on that principle of backup plans, I prepared a homemade lemon ricotta tart this morning just in case. I'll go brew some coffee and bring it out. As I gathered the plates, Clara kept her eyes fixed on me. The hostility that usually simmered in her gaze was gone, replaced by a profound, confusing silence. She realized I wasn't fighting against her. I was protecting the family she kept trying to tear apart. The rest of the evening flowed effortlessly. The lemon tart was a resounding success, cutting through the richness of the dinner perfectly. By the time Arthur and Evelyn left at 10 o'clock, they were laughing and exchanging warm embraces with us at the front door. "We'll see you at the office on Monday," Evelyn said, giving my hand a firm, meaningful squeeze. "We have much to discuss regarding the transition into your new office." My heart soared. I had done it. I closed the front door and leaned against the heavy wood, letting out a long, shaky breath of relief. David wrapped his arms around my waist, lifting my feet off the floor in a joyous hug. "You were magnificent," he cheered, kissing my forehead. "They loved you. They loved the food." It was perfect. From the living room, a quiet throat clearing interrupted our celebration. Clara stood by the sofa, her expensive coat already draped over her arm. She looked smaller somehow, entirely stripped of her usual haughty armor. David gently set me down, turning to his sister with a wide smile. "Hey, Clary, thanks for coming. I know the pie thing was a bummer, but you being here meant a lot to us." Clara didn't look at him. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, carrying the heavy weight of an unspoken apology she didn't quite know how to articulate yet. The realization of her own toxic behavior seemed to be crashing down on her all at once in the quiet aftermath of the house. "David," Clara said softly, her voice trembling just a fraction, "can you give us a minute? I need to talk to your wife alone."
David blinked, his jubilant smile faltering as he looked between his sister and me. The tension in the living room was palpable, no longer laced with venom, but heavy with an unfamiliar, fragile gravity. He hesitated, clearly unsure if he should leave us alone after the stressful evening I had just navigated. "Are you sure?" he asked softly, his hand resting reassuringly on the small of my back.
I looked at Clara. Her posture was completely deflated, her designer coat clutched in her hands like a physical shield. She gave a small, jerky nod. "It's okay, David," I whispered, leaning into his touch for a fleeting second. "Go wrap up the leftover roast. We'll be right there." With a reluctant nod, David disappeared into the kitchen, the swinging door shutting behind him.
The house fell completely silent, save for the distant hum of the refrigerator. Clara and I stood a few feet apart, separated by a chasm of years filled with passive-aggressive comments, ruined family holidays, and silent competitions. She took a shaky breath, refusing to meet my eyes at first. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why did you cover for me?" "You had the perfect opportunity to destroy me in front of those partners, to prove to David exactly how awful I've been." I crossed my arms, feeling the exhaustion of the day finally seeping into my bones. "Because this isn't a courtroom, Clara. It's our home. If I exposed you, yes, I would have won. I would have humiliated you." I paused, letting the reality of my words sink in. "But I also would have broken your brother's heart. I love him too much to let my ego destroy his family."
Clara stared at me, her eyes wide as if I had spoken a language she didn't understand. Slowly, the fight completely drained out of her. She slumped onto the edge of the sofa, the expensive coat slipping from her grasp to pool on the floor. For the first time since I had met her, the immaculate, haughty Clara looked profoundly vulnerable. "I didn't think you cared," she whispered, a tear finally spilling over her mascara-lined lashes. "I always thought you just tolerated us, tolerated me." I stayed where I was, wanting to give her the space to finally speak her truth. "Why would you think that?" She let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. "Look at you. You're brilliant. You're about to be a partner at a top law firm. You bought this beautiful house. You host these incredible dinners. You have everything. When David brought you home, I felt so completely insignificant. I'm just a housewife whose own husband barely looks at her anymore." The confession hung in the air, raw and devastating. My heart ached at the profound sadness in her voice. I had been so focused on defending myself against her attacks that I had completely missed the deep, festering insecurity driving them. She wasn't acting out of malice. She was acting out of fear. "I wanted to bring a homemade pie," Clara choked out, covering her face with her hands. "But I kept messing up the crust because I was crying. I bought the pie at the bakery because I felt like a failure. And then when I saw your perfect kitchen, I just wanted you to fail too. I'm so sorry." I slowly walked over to the sofa and sat down on the opposite end. The space between us felt less like a battlefield now, and more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. I looked at this woman, my husband's beloved sister, and realized how tragically we had misunderstood each other. "You think I have everything together?" I asked quietly. "Clara, I bought a decoy roast because I was terrified of you." She lowered her hands, looking at me with red, swollen eyes. "I work 80-hour weeks," I confessed, letting my own armor fall away. "I miss anniversaries. I barely sleep, and I constantly feel like I'm failing David as a wife. I look at you, how effortlessly you manage your home, how beautifully you arrange family gatherings, how you always know exactly what David needs, and I feel inadequate." "I thought you hated me because I wasn't domestic enough for your brother," Clara sniffled, a look of profound disbelief washing over her face. You were jealous of me? I was intimidated by you, I corrected gently. I wanted your approval so badly when David and I first got married, but every time we were in the same room, it felt like a test I was failing. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of years of misplaced jealousy evaporating into the quiet room. Two women, completely exhausted from trying to measure up to an impossible standard, finally seeing each other clearly. I'm not your enemy, Clara, I said, my tone firm but compassionate, but I will not be your punching bag anymore. If we're going to be family, the sabotage ends tonight. She nodded frantically, fresh tears falling. It ends tonight, I swear to you. Clara shifted on the sofa, closing the distance between us. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and gently touched my arm. It was the first time she had ever initiated physical contact with me that wasn't a stiff, obligatory hug at a holiday party. I am so incredibly sorry, she said, her voice thick with genuine remorse. For the salt, for the pie, for the last 4 years. You didn't deserve any of it. You've been nothing but gracious to my brother, and I let my own misery blind me to that. I looked down at her hand resting on my arm, feeling a sudden, overwhelming wave of relief. The heavy knot of anxiety that I had carried in my chest for years finally began to loosen. I didn't just survive the dinner. I had somehow salvaged a relationship I thought was beyond repair. I reached over and placed my hand over hers, giving it a gentle, forgiving squeeze. Thank you, Clara. That means a lot to me. I really did ruin your decoy roast, though. She managed a wet, self-deprecating chuckle, wiping her eyes with her free hand. That was a perfectly good piece of meat. I couldn't help but laugh softly. It was cheap chuck-eye, Clara, and honestly, it was worth it if it finally got us to this moment. She smiled, a real, unforced smile that reached her eyes. The harsh, judgmental lines that usually framed her face softened, making her look younger and far more like the brother she loved so dearly. We weren't suddenly going to be best friends overnight, but the war was finally over. We had laid the first brick of a brand new foundation. The kitchen door swung open, and David walked back into the living room holding 2 glasses of water. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting between me and Clara. He saw the red rims of his sister's eyes and the tear tracks on her cheeks, and a look of immediate, protective panic flashed across his face. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tight with concern, as he hurried over. "Are you two okay?" Before I could say a word, Clara stood up. She took the glass of water from his hand and gave her brother a warm, reassuring smile. "We're perfectly fine, Davy," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "We were just having a little girl talk." David looked at me, raising an eyebrow in silent question. I remembered earlier in the evening when Clara had used that exact phrase as a toxic shield. Now it was a genuine truth. I smiled back at my husband, nodding slowly to confirm her words. "She's right," I told him, standing up to join them. "Just clearing the air. It's been a long, emotional night for everyone." David's shoulders dropped as he let out a loud sigh of relief. He pulled us both into a sudden, tight group hug. "You guys had me worried for a second. I love you both so much, you know that?" "We know," Clara murmured, resting her head against his shoulder. She caught my eye over his arm and mouthed the words, "Thank you." I squeezed my husband's waist, feeling the warmth of my family surround me. The senior partners may have given me the professional validation I craved tonight, but this hard-won peace in my own home was the true victory. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting a warm, golden glow across the marble countertops. For the first time in years, the space felt entirely like mine again, completely devoid of the lingering anxiety that usually followed one of Clara's visits. I stood by the sink, slowly washing the last of the crystal wine glasses, listening to the quiet hum of the Sunday morning neighborhood. David padded into the kitchen in his sweatpants, his hair delightfully messy. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. Morning, future partner, he mumbled sleepily, planting a kiss on my cheek. I still can't believe how perfect last night was. It really was, I agreed, leaning back against him. He paused, his fingers lightly tracing the edge of the sink. You know, when I walked into the living room last night, Clara looked completely different. I haven't seen her cry like that since we were kids. Are you absolutely sure everything is okay? I turned around in his arms, looking up into his earnest, loving face. I thought about the decoy roast hidden in the outdoor trash bin, and the secret I had sworn to keep. I was protecting his sister, yes, but I was also protecting him. We're more than okay, David, I said gently, smoothing his hair. We finally understand each other. It just took a long time to get there. As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the kitchen island. I picked it up. It was a text message from Clara. Good morning. Thank you again for the grace you showed me last night. I don't deserve it, but I promise to earn it. Have a peaceful Sunday. I smiled, typing back a simple heart emoji. The mahogany doors of the senior partners conference room always seemed designed to intimidate, but as I walked through them on Monday morning, my steps were light. Arthur and Evelyn were already seated at the massive glass table, reviewing a thick stack of legal briefs. The aroma of strong espresso filled the air, replacing the rosemary and garlic of Friday night. Evelyn looked up, taking off her reading glasses. A warm, genuine smile spread across her face. Please, take a seat. We were just discussing your latest filings for the Henderson case. Stellar work, as always. Thank you, Evelyn, I replied, taking the chair across from them, keeping my posture professional but relaxed. Arthur folded his hands on the table. We won't keep you in suspense. You've proven your legal acumen over the last 5 years, but what we look for in a partner goes beyond the courtroom. We look for grace under pressure, the ability to pivot when disaster strikes, and the emotional intelligence to manage complex relationships. Evelyn nodded in agreement. Dropping a dessert right before dinner could ruin an amateur host's evening. But you handled it seamlessly, protecting your sister-in-law's feelings while pivoting to a brilliant backup plan. That's the kind of leadership we need. I felt a sudden, profound twist of irony. The very incident Clara had orchestrated to destroy me was the final proof they needed to promote me. By choosing empathy over revenge, I had unknowingly sealed my own success. It is our absolute pleasure, Arthur said, extending his hand across the table, to officially welcome you as the newest junior partner of the firm. I shook his hand, my heart soaring. The years of sacrifice had finally materialized into reality. 2 weeks passed, settling into a comfortable, newly defined routine. The promotion brought a mountain of new responsibilities, but the weight felt entirely different now. It was a burden of success, not a struggle for survival. Yet, amidst the flurry of new clients and corner office logistics, my thoughts frequently drifted to Clara. Since the dinner party, our communication had been limited to polite, brief text messages. There was no hostility, but the silence felt remarkably fragile, like newly formed ice over a deep pond. I knew someone had to take the first real step to test the ice. Late Thursday evening, while I was highlighting a deposition transcript on the sofa, my phone rang. Clara's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hi, Clara. How are you?" "Hi." Her voice was hesitant, lacking its usual performative volume. "I know you're probably exhausted, and I heard about the official promotion from David. Congratulations. You really earned it." "Thank you," I said softly, setting my highlighter down. "I appreciate that." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in the background on her end. "I was wondering," she started, her voice faltering slightly, "if you're not too busy this Saturday, would you want to come over? For lunch? Just the two of us. I want to try making that lemon ricotta tart, but I'd love it if you could show me how." It was a staggering olive branch. Clara, who prided herself on domestic perfection, was asking me, the career woman she had mocked, for help in the kitchen.
I'd love to, Clara, I answered sincerely. What time should I be there? Saturday afternoon brought a gentle, unseasonably warm breeze as I pulled into Clara's expansive driveway. Her home was a sprawling, magazine-perfect estate, framed by meticulously manicured hedges and blooming hydrangeas. In the past, walking up to her pristine front door felt like marching into an enemy fortress. Today, it just felt like visiting family.
Clara answered the door wearing a casual sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to the perfectly tailored dresses she usually wore to intimidate me. She looked tired, but the defensive tightness around her eyes was completely gone. "You made it," she smiled, stepping aside to let me in. The interior of the house was immaculate, almost painfully so. Every cushion was fluffed, every surface gleamed, but it felt incredibly silent. The air felt heavy with a distinct, undeniable loneliness. "Where is Mark today?" I asked casually, referring to her husband as we walked toward the kitchen. Clara let out a small, quiet sigh. "Golfing. Then he has a client dinner. He's usually gone on the weekends. It's fine. I'm used to it." The way her voice trailed off broke my heart. The gilded cage she lived in suddenly became startlingly clear. She had spent years projecting an image of the perfect, attentive housewife because it was the only control she had left in a marriage that was emotionally vacant. Her jealousy of my relationship with David, a partnership built on mutual support and presence, finally made complete, tragic sense. "Well," I said warmly, setting my grocery bag of fresh lemons and ricotta on her pristine kitchen island. "His loss is my gain. I brought the secret ingredients. Are you ready to get your hands messy?" For the first time all day, a genuine spark lit up her eyes. "Absolutely." Clara's kitchen was a chef's dream, outfitted with appliances that looked like they had never been used. We stood side by side at the massive island, a dusting of flour quickly covering the dark granite. There were no passive-aggressive remarks, no hovering, and no hidden salt shakers. "Okay, the trick to the crust," I explained, gently guiding her hands as she cut the cold butter into the flour, "is to not overwork it. You want to leave little pockets of butter. That's what makes it flaky." Clara concentrated fiercely, her brow furrowed. "I always thought you had to mix it until it was completely smooth. No wonder my crusts always turned out like rocks." "Perfection is overrated," I laughed softly. "Sometimes the flaws are what make it work." She paused, her flour-dusted hands resting over the mixing bowl. She looked at me, understanding the double meaning in my words. "I spent so long trying to be perfect," she murmured, keeping her eyes on the dough. "I thought if I had the perfect house, the perfect recipes, Mark would stay home more. And when he didn't, I took that anger out on you, because David never leaves your side." "You don't have to earn love through perfection, Clara," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "You are enough, exactly as you are." A single tear slipped down her cheek, landing in the flour. She quickly wiped her face with the back of her wrist, letting out a watery laugh. "Great." Now I'm salting the dough with my tears. "A little extra salt never hurt anyone," I teased, bumping my shoulder affectionately against hers. Clara laughed, a bright, beautiful sound that echoed through the empty house, filling it with life. The kitchen timer buzzed, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. Clara grabbed a pair of floral oven mitts and carefully pulled the tart from the oven. The edges were slightly uneven, and a tiny bit of the lemon filling had bubbled over the side of the crust, lightly caramelizing on the pan. It was not the picture-perfect dessert Clara usually strove for, but the bright, citrusy aroma filling the room was absolutely divine. "It's a little lopsided," Clara noted, tilting her head as she set the pan on a cooling rack. "It's rustic," I corrected with a smile, handing her a knife. "And I promise you, the taste is what matters." We didn't even wait for it to cool properly. Clara cut 2 generous slices, the warm filling oozing slightly onto our plates. We sat at the kitchen island, blowing on the steaming pastry before taking our first bites. The tartness of the lemon perfectly balanced the creamy, rich ricotta and the buttery, flaky crust. Clara closed her eyes, savoring the flavor. Oh, wow, that is incredibly good. And I made the crust. I actually made it.
You did, I agreed, taking another bite. See, you don't need a bakery to save the day. She looked down at her plate, her expression turning reflective. I think I've been relying on bakeries, on shortcuts and perfect presentations for too long. In my marriage, in my life. I've been trying to glaze over the cracks instead of just admitting the foundation is crumbling. I reached across the island, resting my hand over hers. Admitting it is the hardest part, Clara, but now that you have, you get to decide how to rebuild, and you don't have to do it alone. A month later, the sweltering heat of late July draped over our backyard. We were hosting a casual Sunday barbecue for the extended family. In the past, these gatherings felt like navigating a minefield. I would spend hours agonizing over the menu, terrified of the inevitable, subtle criticisms Clara would deliver regarding my dry chicken or store-bought potato salad. Today was entirely different. David stood at the grill, flipping burgers with a spatula while laughing with his uncle. I was arranging a vibrant summer salad on the patio table, wearing comfortable shorts and a simple tank top, utterly unbothered by the fact that I hadn't ironed the linen tablecloth. The sliding glass door opened, and Clara stepped out onto the patio, holding a massive covered glass bowl. She was glowing, dressed in a relaxed sundress, her hair tied up in a messy bun. "The macaroni salad is ready," she announced, setting it down next to my greens. And before anyone asks, yes, I made the dressing from scratch, and yes, it has way too much garlic, just the way David likes it. David cheered from the grill, raising his spatula in salute. I smiled, handing Clara a glass of iced tea. "It looks amazing. Thank you for making it." "Thank you for the recipe," she winked, taking a sip. There was a profound, unspoken ease between us. The family noticed it too. David's mother, who was sitting under the patio umbrella, looked between Clara and me with a bemused, relieved expression. The silent tension that had choked our family gatherings for 4 years had vanished, replaced by the warm, authentic hum of genuine connection. We were finally just a family, enjoying a summer afternoon. The peace of the afternoon was momentarily disrupted by the loud, rumbling engine of Mark's sports car pulling into the driveway. He walked into the backyard a few minutes later, still wearing his golf clothes, glued to his phone. He offered brief, distracted nods to the family before wandering over to the buffet table where Clara and I were organizing the silverware. "Finally," Mark muttered, not looking up from his screen. "I'm starving. What did we cater this time, Clara? Did you pick up those ribs from the club?" Clara's posture stiffened slightly, but she didn't shrink away as she used to. "I didn't cater anything, Mark. David is grilling, and I made the macaroni salad." Mark finally looked up, his brow furrowing in irritation. "You made it? Why?" "You know you always stress yourself out and make a mess of the kitchen when you try to cook for these things. The club's food is just easier." In the past, Clara would have flushed with humiliation and immediately deflected the attention by criticizing something I had done. But the woman standing beside me had changed. She had baked a lopsided tart and realized she was enough. Clara stood tall, holding his dismissive gaze. "I enjoyed making it, Mark, and my sister-in-law gave me a wonderful recipe. If you prefer the club's food, you are more than welcome to drive back there and eat alone. But here, we eat as a family." A heavy silence fell over the immediate area. Mark blinked, clearly startled by the calm, immovable boundary his wife had just drawn. He looked at me, perhaps expecting me to smooth things over. Instead, I gave him a polite, thoroughly professional lawyer smile. "The salad is excellent, Mark. You should really try it." Mark silently grabbed a plate, his previous arrogance entirely deflated. He scooped a generous portion of Clara's macaroni salad and retreated to a chair on the far side of the lawn. Clara let out a long, shaky exhale, leaning her hip against the wooden table. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly, ensuring the rest of the family couldn't hear us over the music playing from the outdoor speakers.
Clara nodded, a tremulous but genuinely proud smile touching her lips. I am. My heart is beating 1,000,000 miles a minute, but I'm okay. I think that's the first time in 3 years I've actually stood up to him. You did beautifully, I praised her, my heart swelling with admiration. You were firm, you were respectful, and you didn't back down. That takes a lot of courage.
She turned to face me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me what it looks like to be strong without being cruel. You showed me that night in your kitchen, when you could have destroyed me but chose to protect me instead. I reached out, wrapping my arms around her in a tight, protective embrace.
Clara hugged me back just as fiercely, burying her face in my shoulder. This wasn't the obligatory, stiff hug of in-laws maintaining appearances. This was a fierce, loyal embrace between two women who had fought through their own insecurities to find common ground. We protect each other now, I whispered fiercely into her ear. No more decoy roasts, no more hiding. No more hiding, Clara echoed, pulling back and wiping a happy tear from her cheek. Now, let's go eat before David burns those burgers to a crisp. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of violet and gold, the backyard had cleared out. The sticky summer heat had finally broken, leaving a cool, refreshing evening breeze in its wake. I sat on the porch swing, a lukewarm glass of lemonade in my hand, listening to the crickets beginning their nightly chorus. David walked out of the house, letting the screen door click shut behind him. He carried 2 fresh glasses of water, handing one to me before sitting down heavily beside me on the swing. Well, he sighed happily, kicking his feet off the ground to set us in a gentle, rocking motion. That was probably the best barbecue we've ever hosted. Nobody argued, nobody cried. It was a miracle. I took a sip of my water, leaning my head onto his shoulder. It wasn't a miracle, David. It was just growth. He kissed the top of my head, his arm wrapping securely around me. I don't know what you said to her that night after the dinner with your partners. I know you both claim it was just girl talk, and I know better than to push for the details. But whatever you did, you gave me my sister back. Thank you. I looked out across the dark lawn, thinking about the mountain of salt, the trash can, and the heavy weight of resentment we had both carried for so long. The senior partners at the firm had given me an office with a view and a new title, but the true victory wasn't won in a boardroom. It was won in the quiet corners of my kitchen, armed with nothing but a decoy roast and an unexpected abundance of empathy. Months passed, turning the sweltering heat of summer into the crisp, biting chill of late November. My new life as a junior partner at the law firm was exactly as demanding as I had anticipated, but the emotional drain had miraculously vanished. I was no longer fighting exhausting battles on 2 fronts. Knowing my home was a sanctuary of genuine support gave me the unbreakable armor I needed to conquer the courtroom. On a particularly grueling Tuesday, I sat in my new corner office, buried under a mountain of depositions. The intercom buzzed and my assistant announced I had a visitor. I expected a junior associate dropping off case files. Instead, the heavy oak door swung open and Clara walked in, carrying a large insulated canvas tote bag. She wore a stylish but comfortable trench coat, her cheeks flushed from the autumn wind. She looked vibrant, alive, and entirely unburdened. I know you told David you were working through lunch, she said, setting the bag down on my glass desk with a confident thump. But I couldn't let my favorite junior partner starve, especially not today. I put my pen down, a massive smile spreading across my face. Clara, you didn't have to do this. I was just going to grab some awful crackers from the vending machine. Nonsense, she chided gently, unpacking 2 steaming bowls of hearty butternut squash soup and a loaf of rustic, crusty bread. I was experimenting with a new recipe, and I needed an honest taste tester. Mark refused to try it because it wasn't a steak, so I brought it to someone with actual taste.
I noticed the casual, almost indifferent way she mentioned Mark. There was no longer any sharp pain or desperate need for his approval in her voice. She was finding her own worth, completely independent of him.
We sat on the small leather sofa in my office, blowing on the hot soup. It was incredible, rich, savory, and perfectly seasoned. I told her as much, eagerly taking a second piece of the crusty bread. "I'm glad you like it," Clara smiled, tracing the ceramic rim of her bowl. "Because I actually have a favor to ask you. It's a professional favor."
I paused, wiping my mouth with a napkin and immediately switching into my legal mindset. "Of course, what do you need?" She took a deep breath, looking me straight in the eye with a newfound, steely resolve. "I want to start a business, a small boutique catering service. Nothing crazy, just intimate dinner parties, homemade desserts, and comfort food." "But I don't know the first thing about LLCs, health permits, or contracts. I need a lawyer." My heart swelled with a fierce, protective pride. The woman who had once sabotaged my kitchen was now asking me to help her build her own. "I would be absolutely honored to help you set that up, Clara. Pro bono, of course." "No," she shook her head firmly. "I insist on paying you. This has to be real. I'm taking some of my personal savings and investing in myself. For the first time in my life, I want to build something that belongs entirely to me." She didn't explicitly say that she was preparing for a future that might not include Mark, but she didn't need to. I heard the unspoken truth loud and clear. She was building her own safety net, creating a life where she didn't have to shrink to fit into an empty marriage. "Then we'll draft the paperwork this weekend," I promised, raising my soup spoon in a toast. "To Clara's kitchen." She beamed, clinking her spoon against mine. "To new beginnings." Thanksgiving arrived a few weeks later, draped in the comforting scent of cinnamon and roasting turkey. This year, Clara had insisted on hosting the family. When David and I arrived at her sprawling estate, the difference from my previous visits was staggering. The house was no longer a museum of untouchable, stressful perfection. There were warm throw blankets draped casually over the sofas, a stack of heavily annotated cookbooks cluttering the coffee table, and the joyful, chaotic sound of holiday jazz playing from the speakers. It felt deeply, wonderfully lived in. In the dining room, the table was set with a beautiful, mismatched assortment of vintage plates Clara had collected from local thrift stores. It wasn't the rigid, formal aesthetic she used to force upon us to prove her status. It was warm, eclectic, and incredibly inviting. "It smells incredible in here," David announced, walking into the kitchen to wrap his sister in a massive bear hug. Clara laughed, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Just wait until you see the turkey." I actually followed the instructions this time, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. I leaned against the doorframe, watching them. The tension that used to choke the air during these holidays was completely eradicated. Mark was in the living room, watching football, mostly detached from the festivities as usual, but his absence in the kitchen didn't cast a shadow over Clara anymore. She was too busy thriving in her element. She caught my eye and gestured to a small platter on the counter. I made the ricotta tart for dessert, and I even intentionally let it spill over the edge this time. I walked over, linking my arm through hers affectionately. "Because perfection is overrated?" "Exactly," she whispered, leaning her head against my shoulder. "It's the flaws that make it the sweetest."
After dinner, while David and his uncle tackled the mountain of dishes, Clara and I retreated to the back patio. The November air was sharp and cold, but we wrapped ourselves in thick wool blankets, holding mugs of hot apple cider to keep our hands warm. "I have something for you," I said, reaching into my oversized tote bag. I pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped box and handed it to her. "I know we usually do gifts at Christmas, but I saw this and couldn't wait." Clara looked surprised, carefully untying the silk ribbon. She lifted the lid to reveal a custom-engraved wooden recipe box. On the lid, etched in elegant cursive, were the words, "Clara's Kitchen, the recipes that build a home." Tears immediately sprang to her eyes. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, clearly overwhelmed by the gesture. "It's beautiful. Thank you so much. I actually have something for you, too." She pulled a small, silver-wrapped package from her coat pocket. I opened it with eager curiosity. Inside lay an exquisite, antique silver salt shaker. I burst out laughing, the sound echoing loudly into the quiet, frosty night. Clara joined in, her laughter bright and completely free of any lingering guilt. "Just in case you ever need to season another decoy roast," she wheezed, wiping a tear of mirth from her cheek. "I wanted you to have the very best tools for the job. I will cherish it forever," I promised, turning the silver shaker over in my hands. It was the perfect symbol of how far we had come. We had taken the bitter, petty weapon she once used against me and transformed it into a shared, hilarious badge of honor. Driving home that night, the heater in the car hummed softly, battling the winter chill. David reached across the center console, intertwining his fingers with mine. His thumb gently stroked the back of my hand, a silent, steady anchor that I had relied on through the hardest years of our marriage. "You know," he murmured, his eyes focused on the dark road ahead, "I used to hate the holidays. I was always so stressed out trying to play peacemaker between the two women I loved most in the world. I never thought I'd see the day where you two were laughing in the cold together, exchanging secret gifts." I rested my head against the cool glass of the window, looking up at the scattered, bright stars. I thought about the decoy roast, the trashed pie, and the tears shed in my living room months ago. I thought about the painful, necessary vulnerability it took for both of us to lower our weapons and finally see each other as humans rather than competitors. "Sometimes," I said softly, squeezing his hand, "the only way to fix a broken dynamic is to stop fighting and start listening." Clara was never my enemy, David. She was just a woman who needed a friend. I'm just glad I finally realized it. David smiled, bringing my hand to his lips for a tender kiss. "I'm so incredibly proud of you." I closed my eyes, letting the profound peace of the moment wash over me. The promotion at the law firm had given me a title and an office, but saving my family had given me a legacy. The bitter taste of jealousy had finally been washed away, leaving nothing behind but the rich, enduring sweetness of a family truly united.